Ah, you're using that one.
Can you talk on that mic?
Yes, hello, hello, hello.
Hello. We're both here.
Hello, hello, hello.
Please take it to your...
Hello.
But I think that's...
Good evening. This is Mister Media and I'm Luc Sala. Is there life beyond life? Is there something at the other side? Questions we all wrestle with. At times we hear about channeling, clairvoyance, stuff like that. In this program we talk with a person who really brought this idea of channeling and clairvoyance to be a very real part of his life. His name is Michael Schuster and he wrote a few books. And we will talk about experiences he had in his life that changes. Michael, how do you see yourself?
I see myself as somebody who's developed a sensitivity to energy and consciousness. And I see things everybody doesn't necessarily pick up on.
Which means do you see and hear things that I don't see?
Sometimes I feel things that you may see or may not, I'm not sure. But most people, I can assure you, don't feel the depth of what a channel or a clairvoyant sees or feels.
Now, for me, the word channeler means that you are in contact with people that are dead or on the other side.
Yes.
Is that a correct...
Dead, in our terms, they're very alive in their terms, very conscious, but entities that are in spirit, non-physical dimensions, yes.
Take, for instance, people that are deceased. You get in touch with them. Do they speak to you or do you speak with them?
Both. But when I say I speak with somebody on the other side, it's more of a feeling. It's more of an interaction that's not verbal. It's a non-verbal interaction that's intuitive. It's telepathic. Do I hear a voice? Yes. Sometimes. Do I see a vision? Sometimes. But it's a knowing that's hard to describe. But I've developed these capacities over time.
Okay, now there are channelers who might sit in a chair and then suddenly they kind of get the other entity coming through them and they have the voice of that entity. That's not what you do.
Not necessarily. I can put myself in a trance very quickly, but I don't generally spontaneously speak for other spooks.
Okay. Now, your work with this has started at a certain moment in life. You haven't been always like clairvoyant or channeling.
That's correct.
So something happened in your life. What was it?
I was driving in a Volkswagen convertible back in 1964, and the driver fell asleep, and the car rolled over. I was thrown from the car, and I awakened in the hospital having an out-of-body experience. That was the beginning of my conscious awareness of these abilities.
And out-of-body experiences mean that you felt like you could move around in another space in another time?
That meant I was not looking through my physical eyes. I could see myself on the bed, lingering on the ceiling. I could sense I had abilities I didn't have before that accident.
Yeah, but now this is something, out-of-body experience, that, for instance, children have very often. And I remember when I was young, and I didn't know anything about this, but then thinking about, oh yes, but I did that sometimes. I was looking at myself. Is it something that all people have and we just forget?
I think most people have out-of-body experiences like this, but our culture does not know how to validate the experiences, so we assume it's fantasy, but it's very real.
And they give you pills and drugs and say, hey, you're a bit crazy.
That's one possibility, yes.
So you had an accident, and a thing like that is called a near-death experience?
Yes, I had a near-death experience.
And when you woke up, you found out you had entered a new phase in your life and a new possibility to see and do things.
A new dimension of myself, yes, where I developed these abilities to be sensitive to energy, sensitive to consciousness, sensitive to seeing and hearing and knowing how to communicate with people in a different way.
Yes. Now, this all has to do with awareness, consciousness, yeah?
Yes.
It's not something I can feel with my hands. These are things that happen in a different state of mind.
Yes, in a different frame of mind. It's a reference point that we're not taught in school. It's a reference point that realizes we have inner vision as well as outer vision. Inner knowing as well as outer knowing. It's not a reliance on physical sight or hearing or touch, but it's a reliance on looking within in a meditative state to feel energy, to feel consciousness in a different and more expanded way.
I see. Now, you say it doesn't, at school they don't teach you this, but are there other cultures where they did teach people about how to work with these energies, work with this consciousness?
My sense is that indigenous tribes all over the world have taught their children to be alert to the earth in what we would consider an altered state. To them, it's part of their daily life. We don't talk to trees too much in the Western world, but in indigenous cultures, whether it be South America, whether it be American Indian, whether it be gypsies.
Yeah. They have a closer tie with what surrounds them.
With their surroundings, with a greater intuitive grasp of their surroundings, which is my business.
Now, since 1964 this is?
Yes.
You made a career out of this, or it just happened to you?
No, in 1964 was the timing of this accident where I had a near-death experience. And I had a classic encounter of moving through a tunnel. I merged with a bright, brilliant white light. As I merged with that light, I felt the presence of my soul. I could not separate myself from my soul. And I made certain conclusions about life from that perspective when I was dead that changed my life forever. But to skip around a bit, it was many years after that before I put all the pieces together to be able to talk about what I'm going to reference in this conversation this afternoon.
Yeah, like the books you wrote. You wrote a book called Conscious Energy, and you wrote a book about conversations with Adolf Hitler. Now let's start with the last one, because it's kind of, I read the book and I was fascinated by the fact that you give a perspective on history that is actually quite kind. And I heard that you actually want to change the title of the book to something with forgiveness.
Ultimate forgiveness.
Yeah.
For if we can forgive Adolf Hitler, who of us cannot forgive ourselves? That's what I want to name the book.
Yeah, so what struck me was the kindness, that you look at people like not only Adolf Hitler and Stalin and Churchill, and you give a perspective that makes them at least human, and for some of us understandable. You can see where they came from and why they did it.
Yes.
Now, how did you get this information? Is it physically an experience that you can say, well, I lie down, or?
To answer how I got the information for a book such as the Conversations book, I have to go back to my near-death experience. When I died, I realized, the first thing I realized was I was taking life too seriously, because I was dead and it was the happiest day of my life, and I was dead. So why was I taking life so seriously? When I came back into my body, I felt a strong need to take risks in my life and to come to know myself in a different way. And so I started to study meditation and self-hypnosis. And through the practice of meditation, self-hypnosis, I learned to concentrate, I learned to relax, I learned to be receptive to energy around me, to consciousness.
You came to terms with this thing, what we probably call trance.
Yes.
For yourself. And that reminds me of, say, what shamans do, and what...
Exactly.
You come into this trance state, and there you have a view on the future, on the past, on relationships.
Through the trance state, which was developed over 15 years, I was able to be sensitive to streams of consciousness coming into my awareness. And one such stream of consciousness contained the energy of Adolf Hitler, who identified himself to me in a car as I was driving home from the state of Pennsylvania one day. I used to live in Wisconsin in the United States. And this voice came into my head saying, I am Adolf Hitler. And I said to myself, yes, I'm Santa Claus, because I didn't want to believe him. And then I said, what do you want from me? And he said to me, I want to do a book through you. I said, why me? He said, because I had to find somebody, number one, who was Jewish in this life, who in their very last life was a Nazi, who learned to forgive himself for being the Nazi, learned to love himself in this life, and learned to channel. I had those qualifications. He said, do you want the job? I said, no, I don't think so. Then I could feel the presence of my soul coming into my consciousness. My soul said, Michael, if you take this job, you'll have no competition. So I thought, now from a business sense, this might make sense. So I said, okay, I'll take the job. What do I have to do? And then they told me to go home and sit in front of my computer and go into a meditative state and feel the same presence moving through me, and that's how the book came about, in front of my computer.
Would you call this automatic writing then on the computer?
I call it channeling, automatic writing. I would call it a sensitivity to the stream of consciousness that moves through me, where I pick up a certain sensitivity to the energy, to the vibration of that conversation. And I knew it was Adolf Hitler because it became something very familiar to me. He would get very angry, like he was pounding his fist. And I had to be very patient with him, but I had to demand certain qualities of his behavior to make this book a possibility.
Are you saying that he kept his persona, his character, even after death?
After death, Adolf Hitler's gone through a major transformation since his death. He was very insane in life, but he was very brilliant. It's dangerous to be brilliant, insane, and have an altered ego to the expanse of his altered ego, to be so strong in his altered ego that he could represent the Antichrist. So I'm not condoning what he did, first of all. But I am saying that since he died, he's gone through a miraculous change of focus where he's trying to forgive himself. But how can he forgive himself when the world judges him? And that's his dilemma. Meanwhile, this was the first thing that came out.
So he's actually repairing the image that we have about him in order to forgive himself.
Yes, that's his attempt to do that. He's having a big struggle with this. Because he still feels the world's judgment on his soul, and yet while he was alive, he did not believe in evil. But now he's trying on that definition precise now that he's dead, because he feels the world that he knows the world sees him as evil. Therefore, he's saying, what is this vibration of evil? What does this mean?
Okay, so he didn't feel himself to be evil.
Not while he was alive, no.
Was he blind, or was he entangled in a power game?
He was entangled in his own altered ego. He was entangled in his great idealism. He was an idealist who wanted to make a perfect society and a perfect world to outdo the anger of his inner rage at his father beating him up, let's say. There's many variables we could look at to explain his personality. He's a complicated individual.
But this one was clear. His father relationship was kind of spoiled. He was trying to repair that.
His father was very ruthless and would beat him up, and he would cringe, but he wouldn't cry. And he would want to outdo himself in his own inner energy. In that moment, while his father was beating him up, let's say he was promising himself to outdo a typical human in terms of what he would accomplish. He wanted to create a perfect society based on the idealism of his childhood, which was very difficult for him to cope with. He never got over his childhood.
So in fact, he was trying to bring the light, and yet we see him as the archetypal evil, as the man who sent 6 million Jews to the gas chamber, who started a war, who engaged in a war with both America and Russia, and was the central figure of the middle part of our century. And would you say that, suppose he had won the war, we would have judged him different?
Well, if he had won the world would be a very different place, because he would have created a real hell on earth for those who he didn't feel were as deserving to be alive as the Aryan superior race that he tried to portray as the ideal. But because he sabotaged his life, though, to make sure he didn't win the war.
It's funny, where did his hatred of Jews came from?
His mother had cancer.
Yeah.
His mother had breast cancer. Her physician was a Jew. He would fondle her breasts. He would think that was exciting, erotic, but he hated her. He hated this physician because his mother suffered and she died. So that was his first disgust with the Jews. Secondly, he claims that those in his ranks were more anti-Semitic than himself. He had to find a scapegoat. He had to find one single enemy, because he understood the value of propaganda with one enemy.
He was a great, did he really understand the human psyche?
He was very much a psychologist, yes.
And the training, we've heard
he understood the German psyche. I have to qualify that.
We've heard that he was part of all kind of secret societies, the Thule Brotherhood and other. Was that true? I mean, that is.
Yes, but beyond the secret societies, before he became interested in the secret societies, he experimented with drugs. He meditated. He saw visions. He saw visions of being a great leader, himself being a great leader. And at first, he was getting visions from the light, from angels. So his idealism was not necessarily, quote, evil from the beginning, but he gradually became very altered in his view because he felt the adulation of the masses, especially in Germany, of course. And he felt that in his own idealism, he could make the world a better place. But he started to exclude those that were not as human as the Aryan race, and that was his mistake, obviously, the Untermenschen. And so it's difficult to say when this began, but it began when he was a teenager, when he experimented with drugs, and he saw visions, and he saw himself as a great leader, and he was contacted by what I would call the military-industrial complex, who saw the value of this insane man who would see himself as so important, who would create a war. He was used as a puppet in my understanding.
He was used by other people around him?
Yes, I feel he was. Of course, he would not agree with that in his life. Now he can see it, looking back on his life.
But that means that there must have been people around him that were even worse than he.
Well, worse, it depends on how you look at it. Worse, the people around him would not have killed people like he did, but they were greedy, they were power hungry. But a lot of people that are very powerful in the world are behind the scenes, they're not famous, they're not well known. And so we call that the Illuminati, per se. It's a grand conspiracy theory I don't particularly want to spend a lot of time on right now.
But you say there was a circle around Hitler who, not even the people that we know, like Goebbels and those guys, but there were more people around him that used him.
Yes. Within Germany, outside of Germany, in England, in France, in America, in the Soviet Union.
Yeah. Now the interesting thing in the book is that you not only give the perspective of Hitler, but for some reason you add the perspective of Churchill, of Stalin, of Mussolini, and in many of those instances you portray quite a nice guy actually. I mean, as you say, Mussolini, he was a pacifist.
He claims he was a pacifist, but he was a bully, and he had to prove to his friends that he was strong. But you could see in his life he never fully trusted Hitler. He never fully was as violent as Hitler, not even close. He couldn't do the deeds that Hitler did so easily, or ordered so easily. He wasn't that dramatic.
And Churchill, who is seen as a savior on one hand, but on the other hand we know he was in the Boers War in the First World War. He was kind of a power monger himself, wasn't he?
But he truly felt he was in the power in his own way. I would say that's probably accurate. But my feeling of Winston Churchill is that he truly saw the threat of the insanity of Adolf Hitler and the sanctity of the world if he would get in power beyond the German border. So he really struggled to hold England in a space of sanctity amongst this insanity.
You also channeled these other personalities. You channeled them the same way, or was it Hitler who kind of gave you an insight in their psyche?
Well, I became curious. How did Stalin feel about Hitler? How did Mussolini? How did Winston Churchill? How did President Roosevelt of America feel about Hitler? I even channeled Eva Braun in the book. Did she know about what was going on?
And did she?
She said she did not. She was so isolated, she said she did not know the extremes of the genocide, and she was in a very strange relationship with Adolf. I didn't quite believe her, but that's what she said.
And she spoke to you also from the other side. So.
Yes, she's still dead, yes.
Roosevelt is an interesting figure because from the book I got the impression that Roosevelt actually made a conscious decision to start a war against Japan, allowing the Pearl Harbor bombing.
He was feeling the pressures of what I call the military-industrial complex. And that's not just American, it's all over the world, the free world. Supposedly free world is not so free in this context.
When you say pressure, you mean it's not like they were blackmailing him, but he felt that work and...
Well, they were blackmailing him.
Oh, they were actually blackmailing him?
Yes, because the people I'm talking about had great interest in United States securities. And if they had pulled the money out of those securities, we'd have gone into another depression. And so they were threatening, do you want another depression? But then beyond that threat was the threat of Adolf Hitler himself. The English were begging for assistance at that point because they were very vulnerable. And so he, in a sense, sabotaged the negotiations with the Japanese prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
And then the bombing of Pearl Harbor happened, and
with
America rose up with his awareness.
He knew Pearl Harbor was going to happen before it happened.
Yeah.
He feels very guilty about that at this time.
It happened, then America rose up as a nation and said, okay, let's go to war, and then
Yes.
war was declared both on Germany and Japan.
He had to have a reason to pull the Americans into the war. To number one, help England. That was his main concern. And secondly, he felt the pressures of the military-industrial complex because very simply, war is a very profitable business. And how could these businesses make money if there weren't the war to boost their profit motive and their power? And it's their scheme of how they perceive themselves as deserving that power and that wealth. But I think it's fascist, in my opinion. It's a fascist worldview.
Can you define fascist for me?
Well, to me, fascist is simply believing in yourself as superior to others, but it starts off with a sense of insecurity, perhaps. But regardless, it's a belief that I am better than you, therefore you don't deserve that as much money as I have or power, therefore I deserve to decide your role in life, and you're less than me. And that's the fascist. That's the fascist.
And that's where people are forced into submitting themselves to the class or to the...
It's like belong to a social club, and if you belong to the club, you're at the exclusion of those that do not belong to the club. pretty soon you can feel yourself as superior. And you can put down others because they are less than you are somehow. And this was carried to an extreme during World War II. Who deserves to live, who doesn't deserve to live? It's insidious, but that was the role I bought into because I was a Nazi in my last life.
Yeah, you were born in 1945. 45, and in your former life you was a Nazi, and you were actually in that former life you were.
I was in the SS.
You was in the SS, so you
Yes.
were guilty as hell, so to speak.
Yes, I was. Yes, I was.
And now you're Jewish.
Yes, I had to learn to love myself as a Jew, so I could forgive myself as a Nazi. And the memories of my Nazi life would not come through until I learned to love myself. And that's
In the book somewhere you say it is a major coincidence, or it's a major thing in history that so many people at the same time decided that they wanted to get into the confrontation of fascism versus Jewish thing, and they wanted to die at the same time. Or
it was a group choice.
A group choice of
Yes.
conscious accepting that they were going to be killed.
But it's not that simple. It's in my perception, it's the belief that I have that all the people that died in the concentration camps or died in the bombings, not necessarily so much in the bombings, but especially in the concentration camps, in past lives had failed to make choices in their life. Had failed to take advantage of their free will. And so they chose a life with the possibility of having no choice, hence in a concentration camp. So in the subsequent life, the life we're in right now, they'd be much less likely to explore victimization with the same ease.
So in a way it was a purging of souls.
It was a purging of denial of feelings, because it's a very traumatic event to conceive of this Holocaust in the 20th century. It does not make sense in this time frame. It's insane. How could just 55 years ago, how could there have been fenced-in concentration camps with gas chambers and crematoriums and people starving to death? It's going on now in different parts of the world, but there's less of a tolerance for that type of behavior now. The world's been sensitized because of the Holocaust.
We've learned.
We're learning. How much we've learned, I'm not sure, because it's still going on.
Okay. Out of this book, I sense a certain kindness. You talk about forgiveness, and that really comes all to us. Once we understand the motives of people, we might be able to understand their behavior and therefore forgive them in a way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's a matter, I perceive channeling as creating a bridge. I create a bridge from my heart to your heart. I get into your space. I get into your head. I get into your feelings. Whether the person is dead or alive, it doesn't make any difference. This bridge transcends time and space. And so through this bridge, I can communicate with Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler, and I can see Hitler's life through his eyes, and I give him the space to present himself as he wants to, and I can see he's being honest with me in the book, because I can see his viewpoint through his own eyes.
Now, out of that forgiveness, out of that looking at different historic figures, I would like to go to the relationship to what you say, upcoming Earth changes. Things are changing, and you actually talk about the relationship of UFOs and extraterrestrials and stuff like that. Now, I'm a bit critical, and I say, Michael, this sounds nice, but it feels like you're in contact with some great energy out there, but why does this have to be UFOs? Why isn't it the Santa Maria talking to you? Why isn't it Zeus from the old ages or Donar? Yeah, why do we have to have extraterrestrials as messengers of this?
Well, I would say that why not? Because are we the only human beings? Are we the only conscious beings on this planet? Is there nothing else out there? I always had a sense of what I would call skepticism relative to other dimensions and extraterrestrials. For many years, I did not believe in extraterrestrials. But one day, I woke up and I found them in my bedroom.
You mean in your bed, sitting there?
No, standing next, about 2 feet away from me. And I thought, wait a minute.
And when you say standing, would you say they were physically there, or is it just something
No,
you saw?
they were physically there, unless I was making it up. But I didn't.
You must have got scared to death.
Scared the hell out of me, because I was paralyzed in that moment. And I started to change my belief. There are extraterrestrials now. What do they want? Why are you here? I told them to leave. They said no. I said yes. They said no. They said, you humans are a funny species. I said, how's that? They said to me telepathically, now, you humans, you make all kinds of agreements. You forget your agreements, all of a sudden you believe you're being victimized. If you can remember your agreements, how can you be victimized? And that's the same analogy with the Holocaust. It's the same thinking.
If you have an agreement that you in this life are going to die on a concentration camp, and there was some kind of decision you made on the subconscious level, how later you can say, hey, wait a minute, I didn't want it. Is that what you're saying?
It's possible to change our mind, but my sense is, relative to the concentration camps, those that were Jewish chose to be Jewish before they were born. To be born in Europe as a Jew had major significance in that lifetime, because there would be a tendency then to find themselves in a concentration camp. Nobody forced them to choose that life before they were born. They knew the possibilities of that lifetime. Therefore, that was their agreement. The thing is, it's not a conscious choice. Therefore, if the choice isn't conscious, we can believe we are victimized.
Being very critical, you mix up time and space and extraterrestrials and UFOs. Some people would say you're a wacko. You're out there and you've taken too much drugs.
That's a good possibility, yes. But I would say that basically, I'm open to extraterrestrials. I don't deny them. I didn't believe in them for a long time. But when they came into my bedroom, I started to reassess my evaluation that there is life elsewhere. And I developed a contact with them where they would keep coming back, and I would communicate with them telepathically. And in those conversations,
you still do that?
I still have experiences with extraterrestrials, not as dramatic as that. It's more subtle now, but I have more communication now with angels than extraterrestrials.
What is the difference between angels and extraterrestrials?
Well, it's a subtle difference in some cases, but angels, if they're a pure angelic being, they've never been physical. They've never left the creation. They're at the right hand of God, the left hand of God, or the goddess, whereas extraterrestrials are physical, but in other dimensions of experience. And so if you're an extraterrestrial, you can be physical, but you have reincarnation in lives just like we do on the earth. But angels don't never die. They're eternally conscious in the same stream of the eternal now, or the eternal present.
Let's take it from the idea that there are UFOs and extraterrestrials, but tell me about their message, because they don't come into your bedroom to say hi. They have a message. So what is the energetic value of what they tell you?
Well, the first contact I had with an ET, actually that wasn't that, it was in Egypt actually in 1988. I had my first experience with an ET. I was at Karnak, which is in the city of Luxor on the Nile River in Egypt, and I was there in 1988 as part of a large group, and we were watching a sound and light show at night, and all of a sudden I was removed from that sound and light show. I found myself sitting on like a park bench in front of a pillar with hieroglyphics around the pillar, and I didn't know where I was because I wasn't asleep, it wasn't a dream, I wasn't out of body, I didn't know where I was. And suddenly I saw an extraterrestrial sitting next to me. And I stood up and I thought, I have to look into his eyes to see what he's all about. I looked into his eyes, and he had huge almond-shaped eyes, and as I looked into his eyes, I became lost in his sense, in his vibration. I lost my free will temporarily. And he asked me if I wanted to proceed. And he actually, this sounds crazy, take it with a grain of salt, but he took me back in time and showed me how the pyramids were built. That was
Just bring it back now. You've seen the Roswell pictures.
Yes.
Did that look like the extraterrestrial that you saw?
Yes. The ones that came into my bedroom were the same ETs that were captured by the government after the Roswell incident in 1947. Yes. In 1947.
So there is some consistency in all this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Go back to the pyramids. How were they built?
Well, this will take about 10 minutes, but the pyramids were built with a strong extraterrestrial presence on the earth. And
you mean the extraterrestrials, the people, or the species from outer space, they helped?
They helped the Egyptians build the pyramids.
And for what purpose?
Well, I can't prove this, but my feeling is that the pyramids were built to be a center for initiation and healing. And the structure of the pyramid, the four-sided pyramid, is a perfectly orchestrated vibrational resonance for making healing very possible. Spontaneous healing is very possible in the structure of the pyramids. And they were built, there's many theories of why the pyramids were built. I don't really have that answer. But I could see them.
You got an experience, you had an experience where you were shown in that time. Now, so you travel back in time. Did you ever travel forward in time?
Yes, I travel forward in time quite a bit now.
Tell me, how far did you go?
Well, I have to qualify this. Time travel is going into a space where I'm in a meditation. I close my eyes. I get very relaxed. I'm very concentrated. I'm very relaxed. I'm not aware of any no extraneous thoughts. I close my eyes. I create an inner screen, like you see a television screen. I create the screen in my inner vision. I give myself a suggestion. I use self-hypnosis. I say, I want to go to the year 2000. I look at the screen, I feel a rush of energy, I feel a vibrational shift, and I can see a film of what it's like in the year 2000. And I actually have the ability to pop onto that film and actually walk the Earth in the year 2000, seemingly out of body. That's how I do it.
You're explaining a thing like, I have virtual reality helmets here, as if I would take a helmet, put it on, turn on the thing that says 2000 whatever,
yes,
and see it, and just experience it.
Exactly, but the difference is we don't have a helmet in 2000. You dispense with a computer.
I understand technology will advance, but this is the word astral travel?
Yes,
right?
Astral travel, out-of-body travel. Astral travel is to astral dimensions,
But does this have any relevance to us? I mean, if you say you travel to the astral future of the year 2012 or something,
yes,
is that the real future, or is that just one of the possibilities?
It's a possible future, because the future is uncertain, because we have free will as a species. But it's a probability based upon our motivation at this time for technology, for technological improvements, for sociological improvements, for psychological awakening, for awakening of consciousness. We're going to become a different species of human within the next 3 years, as I see it.
Okay, now, funny enough, Bill Gates comes to mind. He's a visionary and he writes books, and well, they're okay, but they're not too great about what we would do with computers in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. But in fact, he's one of the most powerful people in the world now, you know, who's in charge of where this goes. He makes a decision called Windows 95 and what is going to be in, and, you know, he decides maybe 8 hours of our working day for the future, the interface we have with computers. Is this man also in contact with extraterrestrials?
I don't know. He might be. He's a visionary. He certainly knows how to market the Windows technology, and he's made himself a multi-billionaire, but does that make him in touch with ETs? I don't know. I wouldn't know. I don't know. I can't.
No, but the funny thing is that at the same time you say that people like Roosevelt were under the influence of what at that time was the industrial complex, the military, probably the people that made steel and cars and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
These days, the industry is very much an information industry, at least a data industry.
Yes.
And Bill Gates is one of the main players there. So is he not there to coerce, say, Clinton and all those people in a certain direction?
I don't know if he cares what Clinton does. I think my sense is Bill Gates would be more interested in making more money, cornering more markets. He's got a monopoly on the Windows environment. He's got a monopoly on the DOS environment. Why is that? Why is there not antitrust suit? I don't know.
You see it as a dangerous development that one man has so much power?
I don't see it as dangerous. I see it as a very interesting development in that this one man has such a monopoly on the environment of the home computer, and everybody's getting a home computer these days, so he's in a powerful position. As long as he keeps the Windows environment open, I think it's okay. But there were complaints with Windows 95 that he was disengaging other programs. They wouldn't work with Windows 95. So therefore, then it becomes somewhat exclusionary. I don't like it. I don't like that environment. But as long as he keeps it clean, I don't see anything wrong with that environment. It's okay.
Some of the visions you had about the future are indeed about some kind of virtual reality where we develop techniques, not necessarily with hardware, but mind techniques
with our consciousness,
to enter other timelines, lives, and work things out there psychologically. The way you described it to me yesterday, it was like you said, a new technology will emerge, a new way of dealing with the mind, with the brain, with the relationship between what is in here and what's out there.
The next level of growth for human consciousness is the study of consciousness itself. We study the undercurrents of what's the atomic structure of our universe, the smallest, the subatomic particle. That's the wrong approach. If we study the nature of consciousness itself, we'd find out conscious intent coagulates spirit into form through a process of transfiguration. I don't want to get too complicated here, but the study of consciousness itself lends itself to understanding the future, because consciousness expands in the future in a way that we don't particularly appreciate at this time. We all will have the ability to go out of body. We'll have the ability to be intuitive, to get into your space. You can get into my space. I can read your thoughts somewhat. You can read my thoughts somewhat. We can do spontaneous healing. We can understand the power of music, the power of color.
You say we go forward in time, but
yes,
at the same time I feel, well, maybe out there in the past 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago, many more people had this capability. In fact, we have regressed from that, and now we are refining maybe some of those
The same
capabilities.
tools.
The same
yes,
tools.
yes, I agree. I agree with that assessment. We could do this. Perhaps American Indians could do it. Perhaps Gypsies could do these things thousands of years ago. Perhaps in the outback of Australia, the Aborigines can still be in dream time. They can be awake and be asleep at the same time, consciously. This sounds preposterous, but because they have that capacity, they can talk to the dead, they can talk to other dimensional beings, they can talk to angels, they can materialize food, because it's all a dream environment. And we take
So you would say that from your own experience, you can collaborate. You can acknowledge that what in the books, when we went to school, they said, "Oh yeah, these people do. They sacrifice things and they honor their ancestors and stuff like that, which we at those days considered a bit heathen, primitive. In fact, were not primitive, but more advanced ways of dealing with reality.
Advanced in ways we don't honor at this time, because we honor power, money, we honor technology, we honor the ability to have comfort. But the earth is suffocating because of our comfort. So the earth herself will carry us into a state of a more primitive environment, but it, consciously speaking, will be much more advanced. So it's a combination of the both. We go backwards in time and forward in time, just like you said. I think it's accurate. The earth has to be simplified.
Your message is quite hopeful in a way, because you have contact with things, and I don't sense in your stories and in your book a threat. It's not like the world is going to come to a big atomic nuclear explosion end.
I don't feel we'll have an atomic war or holocaust. There might be small experiences or local experiences of atomic weapons being used, but I don't feel that we'll have a major atomic release of energy through a holocaust of that nature, because it would destroy the time and space fabric of our own ecosystem. That will not be allowed. And so I think the future is very good, but it depends upon everybody's own agenda, because if the Antichrist returns, but so does the second coming.
When you say the Antichrist, you mean there will be figures standing up who have a real horrible message in the back of their mind, maybe?
My sense is the Antichrist is within everybody. It's fear. Fears come out of the woodwork because vibrations expand in the next few years. Angels come by, they pay a lot more attention to the earth, they shower the earth with waves of unconditional love and light. All of our shadows are exposed within the framework of that light.
But it means that the fear will also be felt.
That is the Antichrist. Yeah. The fear comes out of the woodwork. We have to embrace our fear. We have to love ourselves.
Would you, for instance, think that at the moment this UFO stuff, this extraterrestrial stuff, comes out in the open even more than we now have seen with the Rockwell movies, but suppose a high official from the US government says, okay, we acknowledge, we have these guys and we've had them for a while. At that moment, when I was young, I thought there was something out there in the dark sometimes. And you were saying there might have been. There
might have been, yes. Yeah. But basically, my experience is most extraterrestrial dimensions are very benign to very loving. There are what I would call negative or fear-based beings, but that's a minority. The government, in my estimation, has had contact with many extraterrestrial groupings since World War II. Every major government who has nuclear power capacity, nuclear weapons especially, has had contact with extraterrestrial groups. The governments are afraid of these groups because they feel vulnerable. They don't know who to trust. They lack discernment, unfortunately. But they'll come to a point in the next few years where a lot of convergence of pressures are coming to the earth, and we're part of the earth. So pollution's getting the best of the earth. Greed is becoming more and more rampant. Insensitivity to human values and how we're destroying the earth. There's the economics of greed and power becoming more and more obvious, in my opinion.
So the whole thing hardens a bit.
It hardens a bit. It gets a little bit more chaotic. But suddenly, through all of this, the energy of the earth shifts because the second coming of the Christ is here. I don't want to talk about.
And what time frame do you predict that?
1997, 1998, the next 3 years.
And what happens in the year, say, 2012, where Jose Arguelles and Terence McKenna?
By the year 2012, I'm sensing the whole planet Earth might go into the next dimension, jump into another vibrational awareness.
Funny, because in the ninth, what do we this 10
insight?
The 10 insights from the Celestial Prophecies. That's one of the things at the end, that it's like taking the whole thing in another plane.
That's my sense of what will happen. And it will happen because we as a consciousness on the earth are ready to move into a new space of interconnectedness where we embrace our fears, move through unworthiness, find a reason to be alive and a reason to live in cooperation instead of competition. The earth needs that cooperation to survive, so the earth will guarantee we're going to learn to cooperate with one another. That's the bottom line.
This is the big picture. For you personally, that is also true that you have learned to be happy with yourself, forgive yourself, see yourself in a...
Yes, I've learned the power of self-love in my own journey. Because once I learn to love myself, I can love all that I encounter. I become more and more unconditional. Because I love myself, I see myself in everybody else. That's everybody's path. That's the future of the earth. It's not going to destroy itself.
We're all going to accept ourselves.
That's the second coming, that potential.
Okay, well, so we end on a tone that beyond the extraterrestrials and the channeling or whatever, the basic message is still there. We will learn to love ourselves. Okay, Michael, thank you for this interview. And
thank you, it's been a pleasure.
Okay.
I love it in Amsterdam.
Thank you. Great. So, what did we get?
Got the glass in the middle.
How was it, Otto? Was it okay?